busy coming in.
Yeah, I know even I was running late trying to get here. All right, I suppose we can get started. My name is Ken Walker. I'm owner of Paleo American Crafts in Abilene. I also work here at Buffalo Gap Historic Village. And this is our Chautauqua Learning Series. And as you can see, we're supported by the community, the Abilene Cultural Affairs Council in the city of Abilene, and the Texas Commission on the Arts. And without them, we wouldn't be able to do all this, especially without Buffalo Gap Historic Village. Yes, kind of love them. It gives me the opportunity to come here and talk to other like-minded people like me that are interested in history, not just Indian artifacts, but just pretty much history. And but yesterday I did a program for some 600 children at Abilene State Park, and something I asked them when they were coming towards my booth, and they see this table laid out, and I asked them, what was the first thing you noticed when you were, say, 50 yards away over by the trash barrel, and you come over and you see this table? What was the first thing you saw? What was the first thing you noticed? And a lot of them said, well, you had a table full of rocks. And good, at least they noticed the rocks. I was hoping they were gonna, notice my handsome physique or something, but that wasn't the case. They're too young. So I asked them again as they got closer. At first you saw they were just rocks, but as you got closer, what did you notice then? They all raised their hands. Well, they had funny shapes to them. And I said, exactly, they had funny shapes to them. And likewise, we do the same thing. Many people, if not most, do the same thing when they're walking or hiking, something like that. Walking along and you're walking across some rocks, you see a funny looking rock and you kick it out of your way. And often, that funny looking rock might very well be something that somebody left there long before you. Something that I told the kids yesterday, if they could take away one thing from that program, was that there were people here walking this very ground we're standing on many, many thousands of years ago. And they stood right where we stand. In some places, these people were even hunting woolly mammoths, And I find that interesting. I find that interesting. But how do you know these people were here? Pretty much everything that they did is gone. Their bones are dust. Their tools, their wood, their shelters are dust today. But they did leave stone tools, arrowheads, things like that. And there's that word again, arrowhead. Arrowheads, everybody knows what this is. Everybody pretty much knows that's an arrowhead. Some of you might even know what type of arrowhead that is. But you gotta admit, even I admit, arrowheads are pretty darn sexy. When you find one, you get pretty excited. But what does an arrowhead actually tell you? An arrowhead tells you maybe somebody hunted here, or pretty much it. They might tell you the culture that was here. Oh, this type of arrowhead was made by the Toya Horizon, or the Toya culture. These people were buffalo hunters, but that tells you maybe who they were, but it doesn't really tell you very much about what they did and what they were doing there. So you're walking along, and this actually happened to me here. Picked up a rock. I was moving some stuff in our maintenance yard, and I picked up a rock, and underneath the rock was this, laying flush to the ground, just like that. This is all that was showing. I thought, boy, that looks really interesting. It was underneath a rock that was buried in the ground. So I pulled it out of there, and by golly, that's an artifact. That's a knife. Some people would look at that and say that's just a flake of stone, a piece of broken rock. But it's actually been worked on this side and this side. Somebody used this to butcher a buffalo or maybe even a mammoth, who knows? Judging by the workmanship on it, it's very old, Paleo-Indian, early archaic. So it's anywhere between 5,000 and 11,000 years old. And there it was, sitting right here on this property underneath the rock. Or, like this one, I'm walking along, kicking stones, looking for stones. I'm a flint knapper. I'm looking for rocks that I can use to make necklaces and knives and arrowheads and stuff like that, like you see here. And I see this, and I pick that out, and I'm thinking, maybe I can make something out of it. Pull it out of the ground, and it's a knife. So many people would just walk past that.
That's what was sticking out. That was the
Only the
top
cortex
side.
part was sticking out of the ground. And I thought, oh, there's a nice rock there. I saw it from the, you know, when the sun goes down,
Yeah.
to get that alpenglow, and the sunlight was reflecting off this orange cortex, and it was like an orange piece laying on the ground, and it just shone very brightly. I walked over, I thought, there's a piece of flint, and pulled it out of the ground, and it was actually a knife. And this type of knife would have been used anytime in the archaic, so that could be anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 years old. But not many people appreciate that kind of thing. Just walk along and kick the stones and don't realize what is really hanging out beneath their feet. So say you do know what you are familiar with Indian artifacts and things like that. These can be found almost anywhere, especially if you live near water, or what used to be water.
Yeah.
Especially if you're in a place on your land or wherever you're living, if there's a lot of broken flint laying around. You can find this kind of stuff. Literally, you find it in your backyard, and that's what this is. Now, getting back to the arrowhead, come on in. Getting back to the arrowhead, everybody knows what that is. And they say, oh wow, an arrowhead. But for every one of these, you find dozens and dozens and dozens of these odd-shaped stones. So, how do you recognize that? How do you recognize that something's been worked? Well, sometimes it's not as obvious. The scraper, for example, it just looks like a rock. Well, you pick it up and you notice and everybody's more than welcome to come up here after the talk and look at these. You can see that's been worked on one side. All right, can everybody see that back here? It's been worked on one side. And that's just a simple scraper. Quick and dirty. I found this associated with a large flake core and another scraper. So somebody had set them here, and they were butchering animals, and when they were done, they left them. Their tools were laying there. This was at an early archaic site, so they've been laying there for over 5,000 years.
So what would they scrape with your knife?
Oh, you would scrape meat off of bone, which is probably what this is being used for. Just because it's a scraper, that's just the nomenclature, that's what the archaeologists assign it to give it a category, to put it into a category to help them identify it. But scrapers can be used as knives. Most often, they were knives. And then once it needed to be retouched, they kept retouching it until about the only thing left you can use it for is scraping, and then they don't waste anything. But where do these fit in? Now these Paleo-American Indians, these later cultures, they didn't just pick up a rock and, oh, it's nearly the shape of an arrowhead, I'm just gonna nap it a little bit, chip it into an arrowhead. No, they had to have a sequence of events had to take place before they could get to this. Sometimes that sequence was a long, drawn-out process. Sometimes it was much shorter. But there were three basic types of technology during the Stone Age. And it's kind of important to know where all these fit in, to give you a greater appreciation on where in the sequence of events did this scraper come from? How was it made? How was it reduced? You do that through lithic reduction. First, just real quick, to understand how the stone fractures, I'm going to go over some flint knapping terms here that will help you understand how these are made, why they were made, and where in the tree or the reductions through the use trajectory was it used? Where was it taken out of that use trajectory? So, first of all, whenever you strike a rock with a hammerstone, you're gonna see a cone of force. It'll go off into what's called a Hertzian cone. It's 100 degrees. Just like you see a BB hits your windshield or a rock hits your windshield as you're driving down the highway, and it forms a cone on the inside of the glass. That's a Hertzian cone. And this stone fractures exactly the same way. And what the Indians did was they manipulated that Hertzian cone, that fracture plane, in such a way where they could sculpt stones into pretty much anything that they wanted. It's very, and flint and chert is very hard. The only thing harder than that is diamond, really. Okay, so let's get started. Now, keep in mind, all of these tools come from a technology that begins with this. How do you get from a big old rock like that down to a small arrowhead like this? How do you get to that point? And what can that stone be used for between this and this? All right? So it starts with a truncating blow. Take a large rock, knock the top of the stone off, and now you have what's called a platform. And then you remove flakes from the core. All right? So remove flakes from the core. I'll be demonstrating this in just a moment. Okay? You can further reduce the stone or the core, striking here to remove a flake. So there you go. That's pretty much how it's done. All right. So now you've got this big old rock, and it comes with pre-fractures. You go to the pre-fractured rock store, it's open 24 hours.
Special order.
Yep. So, just like in the illustration, you have a large stone like this. Actually, this is a large stone. It can be a smaller stone, one that's about the size of your fist. But take a percussor. I like hammerstones. I really love them. They do so much. You strike it here, knock this off, save this for later. This is going to go over here because this gives you a whole nother technology right here called blade core technology.
Does it take
All right.
a lot of force? Depending
I
on
just
where you
simply,
hit
you
it.
feel how heavy this is.
I guess depending on where you hit it.
It depends on where you hit it, how you hit it.
Yeah.
What I do, this is a quartzite hammerstone I just found walking along. It was eroding out of the bank. And all I do is I just let the weight of the stone fall. If you force it, you're probably going to have a miss strike, something like that. But it's more like a guided dumb bomb, you know. You just let it go, and you just let the weight of it hit it in such a way that it removes a flake or a spall. In this case, I'm using this. I'll explain that. I'm getting ahead of myself. If you were to just knock this flat spot off, well, you have this flat spot. We already removed that top of it off. We truncated it. Now you have a nice flat spot here, and that's called a platform. All right, a platform is like the head of a nail. You take a hammer, you hit the head of the nail, drives the nail home. This is kind of the same thing. All right? So you have the core, and then the platform. You strike that platform, pow, like that, then you get a spall. Now a spall is the same thing as a flake, except this is much larger. So I'm using this so you can see it better from a distance. But this flake, or this spall, still retains its platform. And from here, you now have a usable tool. This is where it all starts, okay? Well, you can further reduce this, and there's a reason why you reduce it. Say you're traveling, and that rock is too heavy, too bulky to carry. You need to reduce it in size and in weight down into something that's more usable, that can pack away much easier. So that one rock yielded quite literally 3 spalls and a blade cord. All right? Now, say you have this piece here. You can use this to cut meat, to chop into bone, to cut into bone. You can use it for pretty much anything. It's a plane wood. Set a log in the ground here against your chest and use it as a draw knife towards you to make a bow for bow and arrow, or an atlatl, or to anything else that you might have to make, any other tool for shelter, whatever. This can be retouched and used as a chopper. But the idea with this, and right now what I'm describing as a bifacial technology, is to get down to a point where you have what's called a biface. Now these, you can call them a biface, you can call them here's the blade cord. It seems like they got out of order. You can stack these much easier than carrying that big rock. So these stack easier, they can pack away easier. The idea is to get a uniform surface. You can see all this, it's rather thick. You want it to be thick. A lot of flint knappers say, well, it has to be thin. Well, if all you're doing is making arrowheads, then you want it to be thin. But if you're actually living off the land and doing this for real life, you want that to be thick. And the reason why you want that to be thick is, now remember, you don't waste anything. You have to carry this for miles and miles. The reason why you want that to be thick is, think of this like a Swiss Army knife. Every time you need a sharp blade, you got to open it up. Well, how do you open up a stone? You create a platform, strike it with a percussor, either with a hammerstone or a deer antler billet, and you remove a sharp flake. And now, you got something that you can use. Again, you can still take this out of the sequence anywhere and use this to cut meat. You can use this to chop wood. You can use this to plane wood for a shelter, to build things with. You can burinate this and make drills. You can do anything. So this is still usable as it is, but now you've created another tool. You just created a steak knife, for example. And these are so incredibly sharp, these blades. And I use these blades with the things that I do. These are so sharp that they actually don't cut. They'll actually separate the molecules of your flesh. So when you get cut, you don't even bleed. It's so sharp. Scalp sharper than a scalpel. I use them. My wife, Marissa here, makes fun of me because I'll use these. I'll be out in the backyard, and I'm one of the only guys, probably the only guy in the neighborhood that doesn't take any cooking utensils with me. Because I'll pick up a rock, and I'll truncate it, and I'll make blades out there, and that's what I use to cut up my meat and my chicken and vegetables. But to give you an idea of how sharp it is, you ever take a chicken, you're grilling it, and you want to cut it open to see if it's done on the inside, and when you do that, you use a steel knife usually, right? And that juice comes out. And then, oh man, it's going to be dry right there. Use this, and the juice doesn't come out. It stays right in the chicken because you've separated those molecules. Eventually, juice may seep out. Eventually, blood may seep through into your wound and then bleed profusely. However, it's going to take it may take a while. All right, so now you've got this blade here, and that's a knife. That is a knife. You find these laying around, especially on a campsite. You find these laying around all the time, and you think that it's just a simple flake, a piece of waste debitage, a waste flake from the flint knapping process. When in actuality, it is not. It by itself is a tool. So you continue using this tool until it becomes dull, and now you can knap that into this. Now you got an arrowhead, and you can use this to hunt as well. All right, so the stone is it lends itself very nicely to be, it's very pliable. As hard as it is, if you have the technology down, this one rock can last you a long, long time. You can get many, many, many of these flakes from this one biface. So eventually this is going to be whittled down. You're going to take so many flakes off of it where it's going to be too thin to get any more usable flakes off it. It's all about usable flakes. All right, it's not about I need an arrowhead, although it can be. You can at any time remove a flake from a core and make an arrowhead if you need one. You can do that. However, that's not always the case, and I don't think it happened all that often, not in my experiences anyway. So say this gets smaller and smaller until you get to a point where you can no longer reduce it any further and still get usable flakes off of it. And then that's where this becomes this. Well, you can't get any more usable flakes off, so this is almost the end use. This is almost the end of this life. By now, this spear, you call this a spear point or a knife. It could be used as a knife, as a spear, whatever. But now, it's near the end of its use life. This has already been carried up. Say, I've already carried this on my person for a month and a half or 2 months, right? So I've been carrying this with me for 200 miles. So, and it's now getting down to this, all right? Well, that's not the end of it. It can still be, once this gets retouched down, you say you haft it onto a handle, you use it as a knife. Every time you resharpen it, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller until eventually you have a drill. And that's where you see find these drills at, which I had an example of one here, but I don't. But anyway, these can also be hafted onto a handle just like this. All right? Or they can be hafted onto a foreshaft for an autolotl. This would be kind of a large foreshaft. Goes on a main shaft and thrown and used with a spear thrower. All right? So there's a weapon. So the idea is to reduce the large rock into smaller, easier to handle components, and then while reducing this, you're getting quarry blanks, bifaces, whatever you want to call them, whatever it is. I like to call it biface. The whole idea is to get usable flakes off of that, which then becomes this, which this eventually becomes this. All right? So that's the bifacial technology. Next, we move into the regular flake core. This is what was pretty much being used throughout, just prior to the historic times, archaic times. It's the same thing, pretty much the same thing as what I showed you here. Other than what you're doing is this is your tool. The people that used this type of technology, they were sedentary by the Paleo-Indian standards. They still traveled, but not nearly as much. And the idea here again is to truncate it the same way I showed you here, is to remove large usable flakes. You strike the platform, remove a large usable flake. It's kind of difficult to find these large scrapers today. largely because once they're used up, they're made into an arrowhead or a dart point. But you remove the flake, and this can be taken out of the process at any time and lost, and then this is what you find. These are indispensable. Scrapers is probably the very first tool manufactured by man some 3 million years ago. So these have been in our toolkit for a very, very long time. These can be used now, like I said, they call them scrapers. You think that they can be used as scrapers, but I've butchered animals, I've butchered deer with these. These work excellent for removing meat off of bone, to fillet meat off of bone. Incredibly sharp. There are many different types of scrapers. Other tools that can be taken off of here, like this, strike it, get a flake. You may find something like this in your yard. A backed knife, they might call it a backed knife. And these are very sharp as well. You get a straight edge that is razor sharp. The back of it is back, it has cortex on there so you can hold on to it and you can use it for cutting, just like that. You can seat your work in the ground, put it against your chest, and use it as a draw knife, like that, which is how I use this to make my knife handles. That's what I use this for, one of my favorite tools, tool types. Okay? So and you can find this in pretty much any context. Here's one. This is the same thing, except this has been used and reused and retouched so many times, but it started out like this. This is what it started out as. And this would be called a humpback scraper. These are very old as well, and these are all found in this area. And it was made the same way this one was. All right? This was used as a knife. The distal end was sharpened, it was used as a knife, and then it was also used as a scraper, probably to scrape hot animal hides with, to remove membrane. But this could have been used the same way I use them, as a plane, to plane down wood. And they're very, very effective. Now let's get back to that top of that top of the rock. Okay? Right here, remember we removed this from the top? And you can find these laying around, but especially here in this area, you find many of these cores. You find these cores, they can look like this, kind of like have a diamond shape to them, with multifaceted sides. Some of them may be completely wore down to where they're almost flat. These are originals that I had found. These are the same thing as this, except it's been used so much and worn down so much that they actually had to re-accomplish a platform to drive more flakes off it. And if you look at it in cross-section, you can see that it's shaped very much like a diamond. All right? You can come up and take a look at these later. But you find these laying around here a lot. And why is that? Well, let me show you. From this type of core comes this type of blade. Again, it's a very sharp blade. These are back knives. These are all primary flake removals. These are very, very sharp. I use these for anything from scraping, if I need pigments, to get pigment off a rock, to mix with animal fat, to stain something or preserve wood. I'll take this and scrape the rock into a powder. They work very well for that. They also work very well for cutting meat, butchering animals. You can nap that off and you got a scraper. Very useful, it's very straight, and it's very sharp. And it only takes about 2.5 seconds to make. And it's just, again, these things are just like a Swiss Army knife. You hit it here, you got a blade. You hit it here, you got a blade. You hit it here, you got a blade. You need a dozen of them, pow. Fix the platform, hit it again. Fix the platform, hit it again. You can have a dozen of these made in a minute. You can also knap that into a drill, which is what the Mississippians did in Cahokia. They would make those into drills, and they would drill shell beads with them, and things like that. So you can see here's one, has a very sharp point on it, great for cleaning small game, fish. And I use those for shaping, doing final shaping on my handles, knife handles and on lavels. Here's another type of core. You can find these laying around. Find a rock, a piece of a broken rock, pick it up and look at it. If you've got flake scars like that and a platform like this, what you've got is a core. It's not just a broken rock. That was a tool. This was somebody's Swiss Army knife. All right, this tool came from this type of core. Pow, just like that. Instant tool, instant knife. Now you're butchering your buffalo or your woolly mammoth. But that top of the stone becomes this. So this goes into this, which can be turned into this. All right, and that's a blade core technology. It's kind of interesting. This is the technology that the Clovis people used, the guys who hunted mammoths. But it was also brought here in about 1325 by the Toya when the buffalo returned to the great southern plains of Texas. And the Toya had followed them into Texas, the plains of Texas, and with them they brought this blade core technology, which had not been seen in Texas in over 10,000 years. So you see, when you find this type of a core, when you find this type of a blade, that's from the quintessential buffalo hunter, the Indian buffalo hunter that you see on horseback in the paintings, riding alongside the buffalo, going like that. That's where that came from. That is where that came from. And those are lost all along the way. So when you're out in your yard and you find one of these, you can say, oh, that came off of a blade core, and the person who made that was a buffalo hunter. And he was very mobile. Now, like I said earlier, the Clovis people also used this, and there are some minor differences in the way that they prepared their platforms, but to find a Clovis blade is so incredibly rare, almost, it's like looking for a ghost in a fog bank. But you'll find many of these along the way. All right, like I said, at any point, any of these can be removed from their use trajectory and discarded or lost on the ground for you to find later. Let's see here. So we've got okay, so what can we use stone tools for? Sequin flake knives. I actually use this one for sawing wood. Works very well. Stone tools can be used to butcher animals and cut meat. Once again, here's that tool that I found. It's the same type. That one's a little bit larger, not much larger, but my friend used it to cut up a deer. I gave it to him just to see if he could cut a deer up with just this one tool, and he did. He liked it so much, every year he buys several of them from me. Use stones to grind pigments. I use this to grind charcoal. I use it to grind clay. And so did the ancient ones. Grind pigments to color your everyday items. I do believe that is this handle. It might be, I don't know. But there you go. stones for cutting, shaving, or sawing, and scraping. So we've talked about the blade core, the blades that come off of it, the humpback scraper, which I believe actually starts out as something like a tool used to plane wood, and then a saw, a sequent flake knife being used as a saw. And there it is again, using it to cut, to start a hafting groove on a thing. And now the hammer stones, my favorite subject. An absolute necessity for flint knapping. You're walking along, all you see are these round rocks, and you see one that looks that it would fit in your hand, and you just happen to pick it up, and it did fit in somebody's hand because it's all battered on one side, or maybe on two sides. This was used to spall rock, just like in the beginning where I showed you there. This would have been used to hit the rock, hit the stone, and you can see the batter marks on that. This was found at an early archaic site, so this is about 9,000, 8,000 years old. So sometimes the stones aren't quite as, don't quite tell the story as easily. Like this one here, it does have some use wear on it, but there's very little. The guy probably only used it for a short time and then it got discarded. But this was also found on an early archaic site. But that's a hammerstone. And then you get the others where this guy I could see him taking this and, man, I got a great hammerstone, hit it and it chips. Flip it over, hit it and it chips. Flip it over again, hit it and it chips. And it just kind of, being a flint knapper, I find a good quartzite hammerstone and I try to hang on to that sucker as long as I can because they are excellent tools. When you break one, it just almost breaks your heart. I can just see him just taking this and, he even said, well, I broke it, I'm going to continue using it. He kept using it like this. And you can see those marks on it right there. He wanted to hang on to that hammerstone so badly. But what do you use hammerstones for? To beat on things, and that's that you use them. I find that if I have an oddly shaped hammerstone, after a while they start taking on a peculiar shape, a certain shape, and now I'm even experimenting with using hammerstones in such a way that they become rounded, like a disc, and you can use those to play a game called chunji, which was being played when the Spaniards first arrived, where they would roll a round stone along the ground and they would try to hit it with alados as it bounced along the ground. So I'm thinking that those might have been originally flint knapping tools. So I've got some that I'm working on, and hopefully they're going to turn out round, and maybe I'll be proven to be right. I don't know. But you never know what you're going to find out there. All of these artifacts came from this technology. They all fit in somewhere within this technology. That ends that. But before we close, something to be looking for in your backyard. The Indians were very, very astute at seeing a shape in nature and being able to adapt that shape to their everyday use. It used to amaze me that, and it still does, that a fellow could be walking along the ground and see a stone and say, that already has a handle on it, all I have to do is knock off a few flakes and now I've got a chopper. When I found this, I thought, what the heck is that? And I realized it fit in my hand nicely. So what you have is something that fits in your hand and can be used to chop through bone or to process plants, maybe lechuguilla plants, which they would roast, bake the roots in a pit. Okay? But I thought, well, that's just one stone. I found one. Well, then I found another. And it's the same shape. And then I found another, and another, and another, and another, and I see this repeated throughout a time period of during the early archaic. So I have dozens of them. There's some tools here. They're not made of flint. Some are made of quartzite. and adze here used to chop wood. And this is made of quartzite. This was found on a Paleo-Indian site. So here the old guys, the first ones in this land, had the best flint to choose from, but yet they're using rock that you gotta soak this in water for like 3 or 4 days before you can even break it. So you never know what you're going to find out there. People say as time went on, points became smaller. They started out large, became smaller. They say, well, it's because the woolly mammoths died out, the bison antiquus, the large, huge steppe bison died out. You needed large tools to butcher those animals. True, but it's just as easy to butcher a deer with a large tool, or it's even easier to carve wood with a large tool that fits in your hand good. I think something else that goes along with this is, as time went on, more and more people were hunting for this, using the same lithic sources over and over and over again, where eventually over, say, 10,000 years, the stone is harder and harder to find, and it's the stuff that you do find is smaller and smaller and smaller. So I think that drove technology ever smaller, just, to come up with lighter, faster, easier things to make. But at any point, all of these artifacts come from that technology. They come from a bifacial technology like this curious tool here, which I think is used to plane, to be used to make atlatls. I made an atlatl for Frontier, Texas Museum. And you find these with, they don't have a tip. Normally if you have a drill or something, it has a tip on it, like that. And it's very sharp. But this is the same thing, except there's cortex there, so that tells you that never did have a tip on it. So why? Well, I started making atlatls, made an atlatl for a museum now, and had to experiment with tools. And what I found was, if I'm holding the atlatl here, bracing it against my forearm, I can hold this here and use that to shave down the edge of that atlatl without cutting my finger open. I figure that's the way I used it, that's the way they used it too. So, just keep in mind, when you're walking along, one thing you take away from here, and I know I covered a lot of information, and but if one thing sticks through all of this, you're walking along and you pick up a stone, take a look at it. Who knows? You see something that looks a little odd, it's probably odd for a reason. It's odd, maybe odd because somebody was there standing in your footsteps sometime in the distant past trying to make a living just like you are today. And that's all I've got for you today.
One question.
Yes.
The big one front and center, that looks like antler or
Oh,
something.
yes.
Whatever.
None of you got out of line, so I didn't have to use it. This can be used the same way as this hammerstone. This is a beam from an elk, and it moves a lot of stone. It moves a lot of rock. You can take it. No, not really. You can take it, hit it here, and because it has a lot of weight behind it, it will take a large piece off it. And this is interesting. This is kind of getting into the nuts and bolts, but that's probably how this was made. When you use certain types of percussors, leave certain types of flake scars. Not always, but usually. But what I find is when you use deer antler for bone, you have a much flatter plane of fracture, which this does. The frequency doesn't change till it gets near the end. If you use a hard hammer, like stone, you have a much more pronounced, now this is called, there's a bulb right here, you can take a look at this later. When you strike the platform, you get this bulb of percussion, and then it may travel for a certain distance through the rock before it diffuses and begins to flatten out. Well, with especially ivory, this is why I think this is, may very well could be Paleo-Indian. With ivory, you don't get that bulb of percussion. It goes straight through the rock because it's so dense and heavier that it goes through the rock at a very fast, at a very high rate of speed. And I see that in this. So either the person who made this, and it's plus a very, very small platform, which is something that the Clovis people were masters at, using small platforms. They were also good at battering their dorsal ridges. This has battering on the dorsal ridge. So it could very well be Clovis, although I didn't find it in any kind of other context other than it was cached. So there's really no way of telling, but looking at the way it was manufactured, the way it was made, it could be Clovis related. At the very least, very early archaic, where they still had large animals roaming, maybe not mammoths, but maybe they did have mammoth ivory still. Or they had stag moose. Stag moose had a very large antler, much like this, and it's very heavy, and this leaves the same type of flake scar as you see on this. So something large and probably made of bone was used to strike this. It could have been ivory or something like this. So there's no way of really knowing, but it's kind of interesting to think about, you know. But that's where this would come in as a percussor, just like that hammerstone. Yes.
Would that have been used fairly fresh or very, very old? Did they age it before they?
No, you can use it fresh. That should be dry a little bit because it's hard. If it's wet, you have to burnish the antler or the bone. You can see here, there's some coloration here. That's from a stone I use. Just now, I use stone to sand it. I don't use sandpaper or anything like that. I use stone. The stone I used, and sometimes I like to use a colored stone because it just kind of, it leaves the pigment on the tool. And when you strike the tool, it often leaves that pigment in the stone as well. And you see that on authentic, especially the older points. They may be found with red ochre on them. And that red ochre could be either from them sprinkling it on there or using it on their tools, and then that red ochre is left embedded in the stone itself. So I'll often use a sandstone that's laced with red ochre to sand my tools with and to burnish it. So that leaves that coloration on there, but that helps to harden the bone. If you don't do that, the bone becomes soft even after it's been cured, and you just don't get very good results with it. It's got to be hardened. So if it's fresh and it's bone, I would say let it dry. Deer antler, you can usually use that right away, as long as it's not in velvet.
Have you ever done a study of color as in reference to deposition or hardness and workability?
Color?
Color.
As in
chert.
Chert?
Of the plant or the chert.
Oh, okay. There is is it a Brunel scale? There's a hardness scale that they use. Obsidian would be as 5. That's it fractures the best. I don't like using obsidian because you bleed. You just bleed way too much.
What about the color of the chert?
The color, I don't think the color has anything to do with the hardness of it. You know, this stone here would have a hardness of like 2.5 to 3. Concrete would be a 1. You know, and you can have, and then of course, then you get into heat treating, things like that to change the hardness. You can take a Texas rock that's at a 2.5 on the scale, you can heat treat it and it'll be like a 3.5 or a 4. you know, so it makes it easier to knap. But most of the rock that I find, I usually quarry it down along the Pedernales River, which is pretty high quality flint. So I try to avoid heat treating as much as possible. I'll travel anywhere I can have to go to find it, good quality rock. But I have heat treated before. But I like to be able to pick up a stone and use it. Last chance. Thank you for coming out. I appreciate that you come out. I do have a couple of items for sale if anyone is interested, or you can also come up and take a look. I'd be glad to stick around and discuss any artifacts with you or anything that I've talked about.